Hi, and welcome back to Hazmat Ops Training. In this episode, we've got the 2024 Emergency Response Guidebook tutorial. We've got it broken down with timelines for each section, so that gives you the opportunity to find whichever part of the video that you want, or you can play it back multiple times, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop a comment. Let's get right to it. This tutorial is designed to familiarize the responder with the 2024 Emergency Response Guidebook with an in-depth explanation of each section individually and how the sections work together. It's said multiple times throughout the guidebook that it is important for the responder to become familiar with the book prior to responding to an emergency. The 2024 ERG is available in paper copy or in PDF format in English, French, and Spanish on the USDOT PHMSA website seen on the screen, and it will be in the description. You may obtain a paper copy by contacting your local emergency management coordinator. If this option doesn't work out for you, there's a state contact list on the website here who may be able to assist with distribution. There's also a commercial supplier list on the same website. You'll see here at the top of the front cover of the statement a guidebook intended for use by first responders during the initial phase of a transportation incident involving hazardous materials / dangerous goods. The initial phase is generally considered the first 30 to 60 minutes of an incident, but the benchmarks that need to be met during that time include recognition and identification that hazards exist, emergency protective measures like evacuation, and requesting the appropriate level of response to move to the next phase of the response. That said, the 30 to 60 minute time frame may vary depending on the incident. Transportation incident is underlined here to highlight the intent of PHMSA and its partners, and we'll see later in the book a number of ways that it's oriented toward transportation. That's not to say that with your experience, you can't use it for a fixed facility incident. You certainly can. Just keep in mind that the book is designed specifically around transportation and may have some limitations for other situations. This guidebook does not address chemical and physical properties of materials and is not intended to address all possible circumstances surrounding a hazardous materials or dangerous goods release. At the bottom of the front cover, you'll see the logos for the main contributing partners to the ERG, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and its counterparts in Canada, Mexico, and Argentina. Let's look at the inside front cover of the guidebook. The illustration here is intended to orient and remind the user to find and examine the shipping documents in order to gain as much information as possible as quickly as possible. There's a huge statement being made here by PHMSA regarding the importance of this vital information by putting it on the inside cover of the book. So how do I locate the shipping papers for the various modes of transportation? You'll see here that for each mode, they can generally be found in the same location as the people who are responsible for the operation of that mode. The vast majority of responders will encounter a hazardous materials emergency in the highway transportation mode. For this mode, as an example, the shipping papers should be kept in the cab of the motor vehicle, but can also be in the possession of the driver if they're not in or around the vehicle. You'll see here the examples for the other modes of transportation. Let's look at the components of the shipping paper. First, the 4-digit identification number, also known as the UN or NA number, the proper shipping name, hazard class or division number of the material. And I want to be very clear how important the 4-digit UN number and the proper shipping name is to the success of the responder. This guidebook specifically, but also other forms of reference, are going to provide the most accurate information if we're able to use these two pieces of vital information. We'll see how these vital pieces play in later in the process, and we'll repeat it a number of times. But there are a few things additionally here that can also give some quick reference. One is the packing group. This is somewhat of a regulatory piece of information, but it can give the responder a quick idea of the severity of the incident by interpreting the packing group information right away. If we look in the glossary of this guidebook, we see the categories of the packing group, communicating the degree of danger. You'll see here packing group 1 translating into great danger, packing group 2 for medium danger, packing group 3 for minor danger. Next, the emergency response telephone number is required to be included on the shipping papers for contacting representatives of the material to provide emergency information quickly to the responder. Lastly, supplemental information may be included describing the hazards of the material, and this can be entered on or attached to the shipping paper. A couple of items that remain are the contract number. This may be required for the shipping paper, but for responders may be helpful when contacting shipping representatives as a reference for the shipment. Lastly, the quantity of the shipment with the number and types of packaging are included and are very helpful to responders in determining a number of different factors in the response, including duration and some of the technical aspects of the next steps of the response. At the bottom of the page, you'll see an example of the aforementioned 4-digit ID number, as they may appear on or adjacent to a placard. We'll talk more about this in depth later in the book, but this is a good reminder that the book gives responders for recognition and identification of a hazardous materials presence. On page 1, you'll find the flow chart, which is really the heartbeat of the guidebook. This is where the responder will go to work their way through the guidebook and its components based on the information available. Also, as additional information comes available, the flow chart is designed to guide the user accordingly. At the top of the page, you'll see some really good information that's designed to set a pace for safety in the operation. The first statement under how to use this guidebook reads, "Resist rushing in, approach incident from upwind and uphill, and or upstream, stay clear of all spills, vapors, fumes, smoke, and potential hazards." This is a fundamental hazmat response posture for any level of responder, and it's a great reminder even for the most seasoned responders. Next, you'll see warning, do not use this flow chart if more than one hazardous material or dangerous good is involved. Immediately call the appropriate emergency response agency telephone number listed on the inside back cover of this guidebook. For chemical or biological warfare agents, refer to the criminal or terrorist use of chemical, biological, and radiological agents section. The reason for this message is that the guidebook is designed to address materials and transportation that have a predefined identification number and shipping name. There's no possible way to address the countless chemicals in the world and the possible mixtures associated with a spill or a leak. That's not to say that the book is useless in the situation of multiple materials, but that additional information will be required for responders in this situation. As stated here, the responder should consult the inside back cover of the book, where you'll find resources based on your location. The remainder of the message addresses chemical or biological warfare agents, which we'll cover later in the book. But for the purposes of this statement, please understand that there is a section of the book specifically addressing these situations. The first block in the flowchart says, "Do you see an explosive placard or label?" If the answer is yes, the chart takes you immediately to one of the 2 guide pages shown, which we'll discuss shortly. So why does the guidebook handle explosives separately from other materials? Aside from the inherent danger associated with explosives and the need to identify and manage these emergencies carefully, explosives are often mixtures of several materials, and we've already identified how the guidebook doesn't really do mixtures very well. That said, explosives in this case have been categorized and their hazards communicated very specifically here to assist responders with these delicate situations. Explosives are not listed individually by either their proper shipping name or ID number, but under the general heading of explosives, they do appear. And at the beginning of the ID number index in the yellow section, alphabetically in the name of the material index in the blue section. If the answer is no, we simply keep moving downward in the flowchart. The next block asks, do you know the UN/NA ID number? The block next to that asks, do you know the name of the material? We know from the inside cover of the guidebook that in a transportation incident, the best way to find either of these pieces of information is to locate the shipping papers, and the UN ID number may also be displayed on a placard. If we can answer yes to one or both of these blocks, we will consult the yellow and or the blue pages, which will ultimately lead to the orange guide pages. Let's look at the yellow pages, assuming that we only have the 4-digit ID number. This section is oriented by the UN/NA ID number in the first column, the 3-digit guide page indicating the orange guide pages, and lastly, the proper shipping name of the material. If we have only the proper shipping name, we should use the blue pages. This section is oriented with the proper shipping name in the first column, the 3-digit guide page in the middle column, and 4-digit UNID number in the last column. The yellow and blue sections have identical information. They're just oriented differently based on the information we have and how we're searching for it. You'll see that there are entries in both the yellow and blue pages that are highlighted in green. Also, on the first page of both the yellow and the blue pages, the guidebook gives specific instructions for what to do when you encounter a material that's highlighted in green. This deals with those materials which are toxic inhalation hazard materials and those which are water reactive. In short, when we encounter a material highlighted in green, we will stop and proceed directly to Table 1 in the green pages, unless it's on fire. We'll discuss the green pages in detail later in the tutorial. So returning back here to the flow chart, you can see that the ultimate goal is to reach the orange guide pages because that's where we find the most important information for managing the incident. And both the yellow and blue pages provide an appropriate orange guide page. However, we won't always be able to find the shipping papers, so if the answer to these first two blocks is no, we must continue across the chart to the next block, which asks, do you see a placard or a label? If the answer is yes, we go to pages 8 and 9. You'll see here at the top of the pages the statement, Table of Markings, Labels, and Placards, and Initial Response Guide to Use on Scene. You'll see the 3-digit guide page given in the black circle beside the placard examples. It's important to understand that the guide provided is intended to get you at least in the hazard class and will provide information on the most significant risk for the hazard, but often additional information may come available, like the UN number or shipping name, and a more specific guide for a material may need to be used. So in the absence of the UN number or shipping name, we simply match the placard that we see on the shipping container to the example shown on page 8 and 9. This is a fairly comprehensive set of placards covering all 9 hazard classes, with some additional markings and labels examples. The hazard class referenced by the placard is seen on the bottom corner of the placard, and a list of hazard classes can be found on page 6. Page 7 provides a guide for using the placard table and has several key reminders for safety and other considerations. Again, returning back to the flow chart, if the answer to placards and labels is no, we continue across the chart to the next block, which asks, do you see a rail car or a road trailer? If the answer is yes, we'll go to pages 10 through 15. On both first pages of the rail and highway illustrations, pages 10 and 13, you'll see some important information about the use of the chart. Please be sure to consult this important information first when using these charts. It's important to understand again that our best source of information is through the UN number or proper shipping name, and these charts will only provide general information for these containers, which have a number of variables and can transport many different materials. They should only be used when we've determined that the proper shipping name and UN number are not available. As with the placard chart, the responder matches the shape and design of the tank car or highway container with the illustration shown. The 3-digit guide page that offers the information on the most significant hazard for that container will be shown. Again, if additional information such as the UN number or shipping name is obtained, we should run the flow chart again for a more specific 3-digit guide in the orange section. Beside of each of the container illustrations, you'll see a description of what may be transported in that container, some unique features of the container, and their associated pressure ranges. I really like that this information is given because it can often give some very valuable additional context to the responder. So let's go back to the flow chart and say for a minute that none of the information is available. No UN number, no proper shipping name, placard, or container is available. But somehow we know that there's an incident involving hazardous materials. In this case, the guidebook will point us to Guide 111. This guide is labeled Mixed Loads and Unidentified Cargo. Guide 111 has information for a very broad set of circumstances and is based on the most significant hazard for most any situation encountered by the responder. Again, it's important to use the most appropriate orange guide page when responding to a hazardous materials emergency, and the book does a good job at reminding us here in the flowchart by pointing us back to the UN number and the shipping name, as well as this box on the bottom of the screen with a reminder to run the chart again if additional information becomes available. Now we've learned how to arrive at a guide page in the orange section, and hopefully we're at the most appropriate guide as discussed before. Let's look now at the information provided in the orange section. On page 148, which is the first page of the orange section, you'll see a breakdown of the components of a guide. At the top of the two-paged guide, you'll see the thick black banner listing the guide number and title. The guide title is designed to give you a quick idea of the general hazard associated with the material. On the left page of the guide, you'll see the main headings of potential hazards and public safety, while the right page has emergency response. Let's look first at the left page and its information, and this page should be consulted first in a response due to its information being designed to keep the responder and the public safe. Under the potential hazards heading, you'll see two subheadings labeled health and fire or explosion. It's important to understand here that the primary or more intense potential hazard is listed first. You see here in Guide 130 and 131 compared, they both deal with flammable liquids, but the toxic materials have health as the primary hazard. It's important to pay close attention to these sections as they hold information vital to the safety of the responders and the public. The next heading moving down the left page of the guide is public safety. First, you'll see very basic measures that can serve as good reminders to the responder. Next, the subheading of protective clothing is listed. It's very important to remember that this is very, very basic information, and any use of personal protective equipment should be based on detailed research of the chemical and physical properties of the material. The third subheading under public safety is for evacuation. Here you'll find suggested protective distances for immediate precautionary measures defined for small and large spills, including suggested guidance for conditions where fire is present or likely. This is also accounting for potential fragmentation hazard. You'll see the terms isolate and evacuate. Isolation is the establishment of a zone of no entry for both the public and responders not equipped or trained to function in that area affected by a hazardous materials release. An isolation zone should be a 360-degree zone based on the suggested distance as indicated by in all directions. The term evacuation refers to the removal of persons from inside a zone safely, but it should also be considered that removal of those persons may be too risky based on the incident, and sheltering in place may be the more appropriate measure. Downwind evacuation is generally the recommended method, but depending on the hazard, it may be recommended in all directions. Please pay close attention to this recommendation. You may also be referred to the green pages by the entry seen here in Guide 117. You may remember that some materials or UN numbers were highlighted in green in the yellow and blue pages. This deals with those materials which are toxic inhalation hazard materials and those which are water reactive. We'll discuss the green pages in detail later in the tutorial, but as a reminder, when we encounter a green highlighted material, we'll stop and proceed directly to Table 1 in the green pages unless it's on fire. Now let's move to the right page of the guide where we see the emergency response heading. There are three subheadings here. The first is fire, which provides extinguishing procedures for small fire, large fire, and or fire involving tanks or car and trailer loads. Next is spill or leak, which includes general recommendations and may describe the response procedure for small spill and large spill. Again, it should be noted that only properly equipped and trained responders should undertake these actions. Lastly is first aid, which provides specific first aid guidance for a product based on a specific health or injury hazard based on that material. However, in most guides, you'll be referred to the general first aid section, which is on page 150. Let's go back to the flowchart for a moment because we haven't yet gotten all the critical pieces covered. You'll see here in this red dotted line box the message regarding materials that pose a polymerization hazard. If we look at any page in the yellow or blue sections, we'll find the entries with a P beside the 3-digit guide. These are materials that have the potential to undergo violent runaway reactions caused by contamination, overheating, and other factors. These situations are extremely dangerous to both responders and the public. In most cases, the best course of action is to get people as far away from these containers as possible due to the uncontrolled reaction that will likely result in a catastrophic release of pressure and heat, likely an explosion. Moving through the remainder of the flowchart, you see the next box asks, is the material highlighted in green? If the answer is no, we proceed to the appropriate guide page as discussed earlier. We've referenced the green pages several times already, but now it's time to look at what information is provided there. If the answer to this question is yes, we must then determine next if the material is on fire. It's important to note that this is referring to the material itself burning, not fire close by or impinged by fire, but is the material itself burning. While it's possible that the material is on fire, the likelihood is that it is not, so we'll proceed through this portion of the chart under the assumption that the material is not on fire. So the answer here is no, and we'll proceed to Table 1 in the green pages titled Isolation and Protective Action Distances. And again, this is dealing with toxic inhalation hazard materials and water reactive materials. It's important to remember that we will still consult the appropriate guide page in the orange section once we have implemented the information found in the green pages. On the first several pages of the green section, there are some good reminders for how to use the tables. Let's quickly recap how we arrived at the green section. It was either by locating our UN ID number and or the proper shipping name in the yellow or blue section, and the entry was highlighted in green. Or we landed on an orange guide page by a placard or container reference, and were directed to the green pages from there. Let's take a look at Table 1. You'll see here that it is set up on the left side very similarly to the yellow pages with the UN number in the first column, the guide pages in the second column, and the shipping name in the third column. Next, you'll see that the chart is divided into two major categories, small spills and large spills. The guidebook defines a large spill as greater than 55 US gallons, which may be from a container of that size or larger, but also may be from several small containers. A small spill is defined as 55 US gallons or less, generally assumed to be from a small package, but may be a small spill from a large package. Under each of the spill size categories, the chart is split into isolate in all directions and protect persons downwind. First, let's look at what's meant by an isolation zone. Here on pages 288 and 289, you see the illustration, and it shows the isolation zone as a 360-degree area around the source of the release. It should be noted that the recommended direction of evacuation is perpendicular to the wind direction and away from the spill. This way, no matter where the person may be located in the isolation zone, they're neither evacuating toward the release nor trying to outrun the release. The same methodology should be taken in the downwind evacuation. The Protect Persons Downwind column is divided into day and nighttime distances. The primary reason for different distances for day and night is simply weather and atmospheric conditions. Toward the end of the day, the Earth's surface temperature begins to decrease and the air near the surface is cooled through conduction. Soon the air close to the surface will be colder and denser than the air above it. This causes toxic plumes to remain closer to the Earth's surface and travel longer distances than in daytime hours, hence greater distances in the night column than in the day. The distances given are in meters, kilometers, feet, and miles. It's important to pay close attention here to avoid the wrong denomination. It should also be noted that some materials are listed twice in Table 1 and have the additional labeling of when spilled in water and when spilled on land. Be sure to pay close attention to the situation you're handling and which of these applies. When spilled on land indicates that the material is a toxic inhalation or poison inhalation material itself. When spilled in water indicates that it produces toxic inhalation or poison inhalation hazard gases as a byproduct of the reaction with water. When you encounter an entry in Table 1 that has this when spilled in water, you should consult Table 2 once you've implemented the isolation and evacuation guidance of Table 1. Table 2, beginning on page 334, lists materials which produce large amounts of toxic inhalation hazard or poison inhalation hazard, TIH and PIH gases, when spilled in water, and identifies the TIH or PIH gases produced. You can see here that Table 2 is oriented much the same as the other tables and sections, with the additional column listing the TIH, PIH gases that are produced. Additionally, there's a reference table at the bottom of the page for the materials abbreviations. Table 3 is the initial isolation and protective action distances for large spills for different quantities of the 6 most common TIH or PIH gases in transportation. Beginning on page 340, you'll see that this table is oriented similarly to Table 1, but has several distinct differences. First, we see under the day and night distances the addition of wind speed columns, and then on the far left of the page, we see a column for different sizes of containers that would be applicable to the related material. You'll notice the absence of the large and small spill columns. In Table 3, it's assumed that these situations involve large spills. Let's go back to the flowchart to finish our journey through the green pages. We need to be reminded that if the material we discussed had been on fire, we would not have gone to the green pages first. Instead, we would need to consult the appropriate guide in the orange section first for information on managing this material while burning. But then we still need to consult Table 1 to address any residual material that may not be on fire. Lastly, we see the dotted line box here referring to Table 2 of the green pages, which we discussed previously. Now let's look at the table of contents on page 3, where we'll find additional sections listed that may assist the responder with additional reference material. I want to highlight some of the sections that we feel are particularly useful, but the list here will help you to locate all the other sections not referenced by using the flowchart. On page 2, we see a place for the responder to add phone numbers for commonly used resources, and the intent here is to add this information pre-incident so that we have it available when we need it most during the incident. Here on page 4, you'll see a list of safety precautions. While not comprehensive for any and all situations, this page provides an outline for any level of responder and serves as a great reminder for those basic safety considerations that often we lose focus on due to the stresses of an incident. I would recommend tabbing this page somehow so that it stands out to you when you pick your book up and begin to use it on an incident. On page 5, we see the notification and request for technical information outline. It's important to remember that nothing in this guidebook is intended to replace your agency's policies, but simply to serve as a supplement. That said, if you need a reminder for who to call to make regulatory notifications, or if you need additional technical assistance, whether it be at the local or even the national level, this page provides a good outline of sources. On page 6, you see the hazard classification system. We made mention of this briefly when we covered the placards and labels, but here we have a complete list of all the hazard classes and divisions associated with each. On pages 16 and 17, we see information on the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS. These labels may be encountered on individual packaging. The GHS is designed to harmonize or standardize labeling across all sectors of the life cycle of a chemical, from manufacturing to shipping to storage and so on. Fortunately, the information sources we've discussed so far are directly in line with the GHS, and this chart can assist responders with further interpretation if these labels are encountered. Pages 18 through 21 deal with hazard identification numbers displayed on some intermodal containers. You may remember the illustrations in the road trailer identification chart on page 15. The term intermodal means that the material is placed in the container at the point of manufacture or at the shipper and doesn't have to be transferred to another vessel or offloaded until it arrives at the receiver. This is particularly useful for commodities that are traveling long distances or have the need to be transferred from one mode of transportation to another multiple times during its journey, hence the term intermodal. An example would be the intermodal tank shown here on page 15 is shipped from the manufacturer in Europe, loaded on a truck dolly, and driven to a rail yard where it is transferred to a flat rail car, then transported by rail to a shipping port where it's transferred to a container ship. It spends 2 weeks on board the ship, arrives in South America, where it is transferred again to rail, then to highway, finally arriving at the customer's facility, and the material inside the intermodal tank has not been touched throughout the entire journey. These follow the same placarding rules that we've discussed earlier, but it is possible, based on their country of origin, to see additional markings like you see here. Don't let this spook you. It's simply supplemental information and can be useful. Page 22 through 27 have good information for pipeline types and their markings. This is also useful information for handling pipeline emergencies. On page 283 through 285, within the introduction to the green pages, you'll see information on protective actions. This is a very important part of any response where there may be persons in danger of exposure to hazardous materials releases. We've talked already about isolation and evacuation, but the guidebook does a really good job of offering additional information for the user here, specifically for some decision-making factors for different situations that may need a complete evacuation or possibly shelter in place. It's important to understand the difference. Generally, the best way to keep people safe from a hazardous materials release is to get them away from the problem. However, there are times when moving a given population may be more dangerous and risk exposure to the material than to simply just keep them where they are. Sheltering in place requires some specific actions above simply staying put. This may include things like closing all doors and windows, shutting off all ventilating and HVAC systems, stay far away from windows to avoid shattering glass and projectile material fragments in the event of fire or explosion, sealing cracks around doors, windows, and vents. It's also important for responders to maintain communication with those persons who may be sheltering in place in order to monitor the environment for potential exposures. Pages 344 through 349 has a complete user's guide for the 2024 Emergency Response Guidebook, if you desire to read an outline format in addition to this tutorial. Pages 350 and 351 provide supplemental information for protective clothing. There are several references throughout the guidebook for protective clothing, particularly in the orange page guides. This section describes the different types of protective clothing as well as the limitations associated with each. It should be specifically noted that structural firefighting gear, which is the most common PPE ensemble for emergency responders, provides limited protection for hazardous materials exposure. Additionally, any use of chemical protective clothing should be used only by responders who are trained on the specific garment which they will be using during the emergency. Pages 352 through 356 provide information on decontamination, fire and spill control, and considerations for lithium battery and electric vehicle or EV fires. Pages 357 through 359 provide information on BLEVE, or boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, and heat-induced tear scenarios when dealing with tank cars. Both of these situations are extremely dangerous and require specialized training, equipment, and a tactical approach. You see here on page 359 the BLEVE chart, which gives the responder recommendations for evacuation and standoff distances. Pages 360 through 366, we have the section dedicated to criminal or terrorist use of chemical, biological, and radiological agents. In this section, you'll find information on contact numbers for assistance, recommendations on initial actions, the differences and indicators of a possible chemical, biological, or radiological attack, personal safety measures, decontamination recommendations, and others. Additionally, there are detailed descriptions of these agents as well as initial isolation and protective action distance recommendations. On pages 367 and 368, we see the chart for standoff distances when encountering an improvised explosive device. This chart is broken down into various size and types of devices from small to very large. Included in the chart are recommended distances for both shelter-in-place situations and evacuation. Pages 369 through 379 are the glossary of the 2024 ERG. There are a number of terms that a responder may encounter when using the guidebook that may require additional reference to interpret. It's recommended to consult the glossary. It has a number of definitions that may assist the responder in understanding things better. Pages 384 through the inside back cover of the book deals with the national response numbers as well as various other nationally recognized resource outlets for each of the contributing countries. Hey, thank you for being with us. We hope you enjoyed the video. Again, please feel free to drop a comment. Also, we invite you to join us on our Facebook group, which is also called Hazmat Ops Training. We'll see you next time.